What did you find out about someone that changed the way you looked at them? My roommate punched himself in the eye and faked being jumped because his girlfriend was about to break up with him. They're now married. My cousin was adopted when she was a baby. This is a family secret as everyone in the family but her knows. I've known since I was 5. What really sucks is that she already had a suspicion and when she was 16 asked her mother, my aunt, and was told straight up that she wasn't adopted. The reason why she was suspicious? 1. A great uncle came to my grandfather's funeral and when he shook hands with my cousin he said to her face, "Oh, this is the girl that, my aunt's name, adopted." 2. She learned about blood types in biology class and her blood type couldn't have matched with her parents. 3. She's technically of different ethnicity than us and it's pretty obvious. Another thing that really sucks is that my aunt has a lot of small business investments, but she lamented to my dad that she didn't want to give any to my cousin in her will. She wanted all of them to go to her brother, her biological son, and she thought sending my cousin to university was already more than enough. Now my cousin is very detached from the whole family, immediate and extended, and somehow everyone thinks something is wrong with her. I've told my parents that I thought it would be best for her to just know she's adopted, but my parents wouldn't meddle in my aunt's family business. It's a cultural thing. My father admitted that he pressured my mother into a termination before my brother and I were born. It was a huge wake-up call that kept me from going down a pretty crappy road with a guy I worked with, but I'll never forget the look on his face when he admitted that to me, and I will never tell her that I know. I found out my grandpa used to sew big pockets into the inside of his jackets so he could more effectively shoplift. I witnessed a friend secretly trying to suck his own eggplant. He was successful, forever unsure whether to give kudos or not. Good lord, I don't know why he decided to do that secretly with his friend presumably in close proximity, or maybe that's what he needed, the risk of being caught. I guess congratulations? With a big old tangible question mark at the end. I know a guy I grew up with who was hit all the time by his on and off alcoholic lumberjack father. One day the dad died from some heart failure or whatnot, and when the cause of death report came out, it claimed he had been conscious after the incident had happened, before he had died. My friend had told the police he hadn't been home, but had biked to a friend's house to see if he wanted to go play basketball. I found out later, at a party where we were drunk, when I asked him how it had been to come home to a dead dad, that he had been at home all the time and had heard his dad scream and gasp in pain and fall over, but that he had just stood there, first empty, then smiling as his dad withered in pain and slowly expired into unconsciousness and died. Then, when my friend was certain that his dad wasn't waking up again, he called 911. Don't hit your kids and expect them to come through for you. I found out my dad had won the lottery. He won around 250 grand and has never told me or my brothers. It took some digging to find, so I never told anyone, because I figure if he hasn't told his family, then he doesn't want anyone to know. I mean, honestly, good move on his part. People come out of the woodwork for that stuff, even if it isn't a lot of money. And anything you give them as a gift when you win is never enough. Best friend, mid-30s, visits his parents and relatives late on Christmas Eve 2014, and quietly comes in late through the rear of the house carrying gifts. His extended family are in the living room discussing how it's surreal that he doesn't know his aunt and uncle are his real parents, and his parents are his aunt and uncle. Turns out at 17 they had him while dating in high school, and gave him up to the older, childless married aunt and uncle who had been trying to conceive for many years. The stress of trying to have a child gone, the adoptive parents then had 3 kids in 4 years. His cousins. His real parents married a few years after his adoption and went on to have 3 children, his biological siblings. To this day, everyone thinks he doesn't know, and he's never let them on to the fact that he does. He has no hard feelings, but it was a shocker. When my cousin was 5 or 6, he wasn't part of our family yet. My uncle met his mum and they fell in love and moved in with each other. My cousin was still with his dad and my uncle and aunt were trying to get custody, but her ex was a very wealthy man. Apparently, he was a terrible father and was doing some pretty awful things to my cousin, but it was hard to prove and her ex had some really good lawyers. My uncle was not a rich man, but they needed money for a lawyer and a special therapist for my cousin so they could win the case. He robbed his workplace for the cash to pay all the fees needed to get my cousin away from his dad. My uncle's work found out and had him arrested. He had to go to jail for 2 years. He told my family and everyone that he got a job abroad and had to leave for a few years so that he could pay for my cousin's lawyer. Everyone in my family still thinks that he went abroad to make extra cash. Only me and his wife know that he was in jail. My cousin is a very successful, well-adjusted, happy man now. He doesn't really remember anything about living with his dad. My uncle says he'd do it again 1,000 times if it meant my cousin grew up safe. I used to work overnight security a couple of years ago. My partner, we'll call him Bill, was struggling with some stuff left over from the Iraq War, so we spent a lot of time getting to know each other better. Eventually, I was promoted up to supervisor, then assistant director of security. One night, the guy who'd replaced me on overnights called to complain about Bill coming in 3 hours late and drunk off his butt. I knew the guy wasn't good at keeping his lips sealed, and if I didn't say something to my boss right away, then he would. So I called my boss, who usually shows up right after overnight leaves, and told him what was going on. My boss was also an Iraq veteran, and he knew about the struggles Bill was having and how close the two of us had become. So I felt it would be better coming from my lips. My boss came in early, caught Bill red-handed, and suspended him for a week. I'm instructed that when he gets back to schedule him for day shifts so he can be supervised. We kept the whole thing hush-hush and assumed he would improve once he was on day shifts. So I do exactly that. Bill was elated to be working with me again and with our other buddies during the day. We were like one big family, kind of. I really miss that place sometimes. He got better at his job, started sleeping regularly, and stopped drinking. Bill told me he was back on days because he wanted to be. He was tired of overnights. He never told me about the drinking, and I never told him I knew. We both kept that secret until he decided he didn't want to be alive anymore, and ended things a few months ago. Rest in peace, Bill. You're missed. When he made that fateful decision, no one knew anything was wrong. It was a normal day with the usual jokes and whatnot. 60 people from his tribe, he was a Native American, came to town to bring him home. It was a rough time for everyone. If you're thinking of doing something like that, please reach out. Thinking of those around you. Please. Damn. Posting this really stirred up all those emotions again. Wow, that's really sad. Bill was clearly going through more than anyone should ever have to deal with, and I'm glad that working with the author gave him some semblance of happiness during his working days. Seek help if you're able, people. It's so damn hard to reach out, but if you're basically a good guy with some demons, there are people who can help you fight them, and others who'll miss you if you go. One day, while looking through Flickr, I came across some exposed pictures of my coworker. She has a lot of photo albums on her account. It turns out she and her husband are swingers. I work with her on a daily basis. I'd never tell her I've seen them. I recently discovered that my coworker's girlfriend got him off with a burrito and then forced him to eat it. But that's his business, and our coworkers can be brutal, especially towards him as he does come off as a bit strange, so there's no need to make things worse for him. I'll never tell my family I know that I was a twin. One of my grandmothers got drunk at Christmas and started to talk about it one year when I was a kid. Part of me wants to say she was wrong, but the look of horror in some families' faces before they had me leave to play with cousins always made it stick out. It would explain the lack of baby pictures and why I was baptized really early, like a few days old. I don't know what happened to my twin. When I first got married, my sister-in-law was living with us. One day while she was at work, she called and asked that I email her something from the desktop. This was prior to texting and email on phones being so prevalent. I used her laptop and her Outlook to send the attachment. I checked the sent items to make sure it went through with the attachment and found an email she had sent to someone else of a bunch of pictures of her with lit candles shoved up her behind. I never said anything, but had to start hiding all of our stick candles in fear that she'd desecrate my Yankees. My ex used to go through my browser history and emails. She never found anything, but always thought I was up to something. I know this because I read her diary every day.
Sheesh. Sounds like you two were made for each other, buddy.
This one is a bit darker. My mum passed away a few years ago from cancer. She went in for an operation for something mundane and they found out that she had it. My parents work hard and were good at saving. My mum managed the finances and did an amazing job. Now my dad is alone and keeps telling me, "I wish your mom was here. I don't know what to do with all this money. She would have known how to spend it together." The sad truth is, before my mum went for her operation, she planned on leaving my dad after the whole ordeal was over. She told this to me privately. My dad basically told me the same thing privately. After she got diagnosed, he stood by her side and worked from home for months so he could take care of her. He also did an amazing job arranging all aspects of her funeral, even though my mum entrusted that to her sisters. I told my sisters, but I don't think I could ever tell him. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. A close friend that I'd roomed with at college once had me log into their emails to print out tickets. I found the tickets, but also a decent amount of evidence that she was into doing a lot of number 2 related stuff in the bedroom. Not sure that there's ever a way to bring that up in conversation. My takeaway? You should use a separate email for your adult interests and businesses.
And what did we learn today, people? Never under any circumstances let anyone you love or care about use your computer.
I have a couple of friends who are siblings in our friends group. Myself and 2 others were in a Skype call with one sister while the older one was at work. We essentially heard the younger one admit that she was going to self-delete that day. We had figured she was depressed and tried to help her the best we could. The 3 of us and a couple of parents ended up at her dad's house and found her in a pretty bad way in the bathtub, and out cold. I slapped a tourniquet on and used towels to try and stop the bleeding while a parent called an ambulance. The responding paramedic said that even though she didn't do the job very well, she still would have died if we hadn't shown up to stop the bleeding. Her older sister doesn't know due to her parents' request, and it's a closely kept secret in the group. Whoever wasn't there doesn't know. Her father, who hated me for other reasons, always invites me out to different events, but still keeps up the impression that he doesn't like me. It's kinda weird. The sister is alive and well, by the way. She's happily attending FSU. Haven't spoken to her very much, but last I checked, she was dating and getting help. Older sister still doesn't know about the incident. Crikey. Unreal that a family member doesn't know about something like that. But I'm not sure how I would have broken the news to her after her parental request. Maybe she'll eventually tell her sister of her own accord, but at this stage, maybe it's better she doesn't tell now, after keeping it under wraps for so long. Up to them. One of my good friends is positive with a transmitted disease. I found out through the grapevine and immediately understood that I shouldn't know that about him. I've never said anything about it to him, but I've made a distinct effort to be more available to him as a friend. I figure if he ever wants to tell me, he will. If not, he could still use some kindness in his life. A bummy kid we had to gently eject from a gallery opening spent his exit begging for a few bucks, offering to suck anyone's eggplant for $10. It was an odd moment anyway, capped by an odd, sad offer. Later I went out on the fire escape for a smoke. In the alley below was a straight acquaintance, like square straight, married with kids and a boring career, leaning against the wall, bum guy's head bobbing against his crotch, getting a $10 beige from a sketchy hobo. My first instinct was to make some noise, my second was, I just don't want to be involved in this, and of course, upon re-entering the party, the acquaintance's wife was the first gosh darn person who spoke to me.
Hey, have you seen Bob? Is he out sneaking a smoke?
It was a weird moment. I've said nothing for a decade. When my brother came to visit for the holidays, he left his iPad on the counter and had Reddit up. I saw his username and that he had a ton of post-karma and went back to my computer and looked him up. Cuck content. Most of him and his ex-wife. Some with his new fiancée. It was pretty traumatizing. I teach improv and found out that one of my students is a former senator who had to give up his seat due to allegations of cheating on his wife with younger women. It's so weird because he's such a nice guy and I've met his family. When I say younger, I didn't mean under 18, just 20 years younger than him, and he's 40-something. I know that my cousin was the victim of the unspeakable act in her apartment in her sophomore year of college, and that her roommate arranged it as some form of sick revenge for dating one of her exes. It's led to her becoming a danger to herself in the past, and she went from a vivacious, outgoing, bubbly woman to one who barely goes anywhere besides work. I know because my grandmother remembers stories and information freakishly well, but not that she's supposed to keep some of these things secret. Classic case of finding out what kind of adult content someone is into watching. On New Year's Eve, my mum's friend asked me to connect her phone to the Bluetooth in her car. It takes about 5 seconds and one button to do, so I agree to help. She unlocks her phone, gives me the keys, and I got into the car. Phone is connected and I want to test out the speakers and crank the volume up. I opened Google Chrome to play some music and I'm greeted by a very adult video that indicated my friend was into some very specific stuff. I noticed she had 45 tabs open. Curious if she had an impressive 45 such adult videos open, I looked at the other tabs. One was a video where a girl was vacuum sealing plastic wrap onto her hoo-ha. There were also some of women doing the deed with things that decidedly weren't other human men. I had quite enough of that and put some music on. Speakers were good, got pretty loud with decent bass. A buddy of mine had complete control of his parents' finances because his mum will not fricking stop sending email scams her money. She's told that each one of them were scams. It doesn't matter what it is, it's a scam. She's been told how to behave to keep herself safe from it, like, oh my god, your son is arrested and need X, Y, and Z information. Oh, so what's my son's name? What's my name? What jail or prison are they in? And there's nothing wrong with her, my buddy just says she's gullible. He doesn't get it. It's causing him so much stress. My dad cheated on his wife with my mum. They still weren't divorced when he started seeing my mum. Even Ma doesn't know. A manager in my office handed me her phone to look at a picture and got distracted talking to someone else. A text came in from a woman who talked quite graphically about what she had done to this manager the night before. I handed the phone back and pretended not to have seen the text. I didn't have a clue she was gay. And hopefully you respected her privacy completely and took that particular knowledge with you to the end of either of your services with that particular company. And good on you if you did. That my grandmother was secretly a spendthrift and victim of fraud. Both of my grandparents passed away recently. My grandfather had been in poor health for the last several years of his life. My grandmother was his caretaker and she herself was in relatively good health. It was quite a shock when my father and I found her dead in the garage from a massive heart attack. My grandfather, heartbroken and confused, died 3 months later. When we started to go through their belongings to settle the estate, we found tons of worthless things that she'd spent their money on. Now, my grandmother loved to shop, but we had no idea her addiction ran this deep. In addition to the myriads of junk, we found hundreds of letters from people who had scammed her into giving them money. The kinds of scams where they'll send you $10,000 if you send them a check for $1,000. I can remember just sitting down at the kitchen table with unsent letters she had written to people, asking them where her checks were and why they'd lied to her. It was heart-wrenching. So her spending addiction of worthless trinkets and thousands of dollars spent on get-rich-quick schemes basically bankrupted them and we knew nothing about it. We never even suspected it because she was vice president of a bank for 42 years. She was always good with money. I always thought those Ponzi schemes and deposed royalty email kinds of things were loads of crap. Who could fall for them? Well, now I knew who they targeted and why they were so successful. Everything's been settled now, but it was a really tough year for my dad. In short, grandparents died, discovered my grandmother had spent all of her money on worthless trinkets and had been victim to internet money fraud. My sister's boyfriend, while a great guy now, was a troubled youth. He grew up with his grandparents, as his dad was in prison and his mum is unreliable. Substance use. Once he was a teenager, he was so angry at his grandfather for some reason, so he used his toothbrush to clean the toilet. Funny, right? His grandfather contracted a bacterial infection so bad that he ended up losing all of his teeth and now wears dentures. I'll never bring this up to him because he's genuinely a changed person. I knew him when he was in high school and he's nothing like the person he used to be. One of those sidebar ads for adult content used a picture of one of my friends. Co-worker had really off behavior, had a spot out by the dumpster that he'd do his various substances at, constantly tried showing me pictures of his pet snake feeding on rats. He'd stop and stare at the young female customers and make weird remarks about them. I did a little bit of internet sleuthing and opened a whole can of worms of awful things that he had done and been convicted for. His new address was a city away from his old address. On a hunch, I made a call to the local parole officer, and yep, he hadn't registered in a year. His PO rolled him up and sent him back to jail a week later. I never told anyone how his PO had found him. It wasn't easy to turn him in. I felt like a snitch while I was creeping on the guy and hesitated a few days. The final straw was learning that he lived in a house at the end of a dirt road with a new old lady who had, you guessed it, a young daughter. I'm in a fantasy football league at work. I was over in the fantasy football Reddit and saw a post that was identical to a question my work buddy had asked me that day. I looked at his username and he used his real first name. Checked his user history and yeah, it was definitely him. Instead of spoiling it with a, "Ha, gotcha buddy," right then and there, I've been following his posts and giving him bad advice on drops he should make and lopsided trades he should specifically make with me. This all started 2 years ago and he's since dropped out of contention and is now a basement-dwelling bottom feeder at about 9th or 10th place. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.